Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reserve Team podcast, your home of everything Australian and New Zealand football. My name is Branson Gibson. I am your host for today's mega episode. Joining me today to talk all things finals football is Michael Ireland. How are you, mate?
Going well, Branson. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing good, mate. It's exciting to have you on a podcast. Thanks for coming back. We've had you on a couple of times, but I'm looking forward to what I'm sure is going to be a very interesting discussion topic. The A-League season, it's near its end. It's almost over, which means that finals football is just around the corner. Finals football is always a hotbed for discussion as well. So we're going to talk all about it, if we like it, if we don't like it, the ins and outs. We're going to compare the A-League finals to how other leagues around the world do finals football as well, and sum up what we think is good, what we think is bad. And mate, we're just going to talk all about it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a talking point that I think every year comes up. Especially when the grand final comes up and a team gets knocked out. But yeah, it's definitely worth the discussion.
Yeah, well, let's dive into it, mate. So first things first, what are your thoughts? Do you like the finals? Are you a finals fan?
Yes, end of podcast. That'll do us for today on the reserve team. No, I think I can see both sides. I totally get where football purists come from, and I think we'll probably touch upon that a bit tonight. And you've sort of balance that against sort of the Australian mentality where we have finals in our sport. That's just what we do. But I guess the reality with the Australian League is that even though the AFC see us as a knockout tournament rather than a conclusion of the regular season, having first past the post, currently without relegation, currently where we don't have a heck of a lot of positioning for teams fighting out for Champions League spots. What you would probably create without a finals competition is something with a bit of an anticlimax towards this time of the season. And I think finals really creates that big conclusion to the season that the sport really needs. I know we're going to talk about the FFA Cup later, but when the cup competition's in the early to middle stages of the league campaign, it would mean that really the league would just end on the last round of the season, and that's it. So I think the finals really has a place in the calendar. I think it's really important for the branding and the promotion of the game, as well as really drumming it up for all fans. But I can see where some people come from. I just don't think that its place in the game is still very much there for me.
I
What do you
agree.
think?
I totally agree. I think what you mentioned as well is in a competition where there's no relegation, there's got to be something to play for. Like everyone compares, the A-League finals to European competitions, of course, and points the finger and say, well, look, they don't have finals, but they have relegation. So there is still that battle when the title is not close. If we look at the A-League, out of the last 6 seasons, including this season, only one of them has really been close. That was 2015-16 when Adelaide United finished on top by a point. All the other seasons, Sydney FC were on top. They had a big gap. We've got double digits. Perth won it by 8 points. City this year, don't know how many points they're going to win it by, but they've already clinched the Premier's plate with 3 weeks to go, 3 games to go at that stage. So without that relegation there, I think it certainly has to have something in it. And I like that it sort of provides a showpiece, something to sort of build towards and that excitement level. What do you think? What do you think the finals adds in that regard?
Oh, look, it's fantastic. Where as you're always going to point out, City running away with the league currently. What does the rest of the league have to play for if that's just going to be the conclusion of the season and that's it? I definitely think that there's so much more to play for. With the finals coming up, and I think that's a very good thing. It's open, knockout football. And as we've seen, as you pointed out in the past, we've had teams that maybe didn't have the best of league campaigns. Victory not long ago, and they've been able to find their way to the big grand final and win it. Win it all together. Perth as well. When they had a fantastic league campaign and looked like everything was all going well, and then on the last game of the season, it just didn't pan out.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to sort of exactly see how it pans out. I think it just keeps the league interesting. You know, you have by having a final season, having finals after the season, you have more teams that have something to play for longer. I think if we look at 7 of the last 8 seasons, not including this one, but the gap from 6th spot to 7th spot has been smaller than the gap from first to second. Like, that's to be expected, I guess, you know, to sort of have the middle table more condensed there. But isn't that a good thing?
Well, I think the battle for the six, it's something that every year it's a tight race. This year, probably more so than most seasons. Like we're seeing at the moment, it's not unlike the battle for places for Champions League in the EPL and in Serie A, as an example. So, you know, I think that really does drive home the point where you really want to make sure that these games are meaningful rather than being dead rubbers between two mid-table sides. You're never really going to have that to an extent, you know, and teams like Western and Victory the other night playing where maybe it doesn't mean all that much in the context of this season, but you know, the more you do have that, you know, those layers of qualification through the league table, I think it adds meaning to games that otherwise just would be, you know, everyday games.
Why do you think the finals get a bad rap? What are some of the things that you don't like about it, if there are any?
Yeah, well, I think the point I touched on before, I can understand the one argument I can understand with sort of the anti-finals brigade, if we want to call them that, is that you know, a team can go undefeated throughout the whole season, and you know, let's say they win 26 games, and you know they make it to, you know, the first match of the finals, and they get knocked out, and that could well and truly be the case. Is that a reason for not having the finals completely? I would say no, because at the end of the day, if you're Melbourne City and you win, you know, you're essentially first after the last round. You're rewarded by winning, by being awarded the Premier's Plate. So I think really the finals is an acknowledgement of how well you did during the regular season. But if you did win that regular season, you don't go away empty-handed. And I think that's a way to justify it. If you don't finish first, then the finals are still there for you. But otherwise, you know, it's the opportunity to win yet another trophy rather than, you know, not being rewarded for finishing top.
Yeah, well, the A League is sort of a little bit of a unique one as well, because one of the arguments that you've touched on, and I love the term anti-finals brigade as well, because it makes them sound like a supporter trust, like an active area, like they've got a capo, they've got,
They're
you know,
incorporated. They have an
yeah,
AGM every year.
yeah, yeah, they've got their own scarves, they meet at pubs, they put stickers on, you know, street signs as they march towards the stadium or march away from the stadiums, you know, when the
They've got a
finals
vote in
there.
the FFA Congress.
Yeah, they buy tickets to the finals, then don't rock up to try to, you know, sabotage them. Anyway, so I've lost my train of thought there. Actually, I've got sidetracked. So the anti-finals brigade, yeah, like when people talk about an undeserved team winning, I think with the A League, it's really interesting because having a look at back at some of the stats, one thing that I found was it's almost a little bit of a glass ceiling where it's presented as a chance for everyone in the top 6, obviously, to go on and win the grand final. But in 13 of the last 15 years, the top 2 teams have both made the grand final. So 13 out of 15 years, the top 2 teams have had it. Have made the grand final. The 2 exceptions were the Melbourne Victory when they finished 4th and they beat Newcastle in 2017, 2018. The only other time was when Brisbane, who finished 2nd, and Perth, who finished 3rd, made the grand final in 2011, 2012. So in terms of an undeserved team winning, like it just doesn't seem to happen. So I'm not convinced that argument really stacks up. But one other thing to sort of think about, something that you touched on, where it just seems anti-football. What is it about football where they don't seem to enjoy finals? Because we look at other sports, you know, the NRL do it, the AFL do it. If we look overseas, the Super Bowl in America, that's, you know, one of the biggest sporting days on the calendar. The NBA do playoff finals. The NHL does. Major League Baseball, tennis. all the Grand Slams are knockout single finals. They have a prize for the person who's at on top of the rankings at the end of the year, but that's almost all finals if you look at all the different tournaments. So what is it about football where finals just seem to be anti-football?
Yeah, I hear the term. It just isn't football a lot, and I think what that comes down to is we've got countries that are traditional football hubs. Where they live and breathe the sport. It's the number one sport of the country. It's normal to have a home and away season where everyone plays each other once home, once away. If it's a 20-team comp, you play 38 rounds. We don't have that in Australia. We know the AFL and the NRL aren't like that. The A-League has rarely been like that in its history. Obviously, there's been different team sizes over the years, but generally speaking, it hasn't been a perfect fixture. So I think as long as you've got an uneven fixture in place, it's pretty much a given that you do have to have a final series afterwards. But I'd like to make the point that every country does football in their own way. The idea that finals isn't football really doesn't stack up in the sense that there's so many different aspects of countries doing football their own way and different clubs doing football their own way that people could come up with the same argument. You look at the Liga MX in Mexico where they've got the relegation system that stretches across a couple of years. You've got how Real Madrid and Barcelona have their own B teams within the senior football structure, as do a number of other Spanish teams. Is that not football? No, that's just the way that Mexico and Spain do their football respectively. You look at Brentford, just promoted to the Premier League, that they've only got two teams in the entire club. Is that not football? So, I think there's different philosophies and different strategies and different reasons why certain decisions are made for the betterment of that particular part of the world. In Australia, and there's a few reasons why, and we've already mentioned a couple of them, but I think it is unique to us as a country. Sure, it is borrowing a little bit from some of our other sports, but it does work for them, and I think that there are some really great advantages to having the finals competition in place, at least in the current structure of the A-League competition with 12 teams and the way it's structured.
That's a great point. I mean, I totally agree. I hadn't really thought of it from that point of view. So I think it's fantastic as well. I'm on board, mate. You've convinced me in terms of it's something that should be celebrated. Like we don't have to conform to every to the way that Europe does it. We can sort of go in our own direction. I think the unique aspects that we bring from finals, the drama this season alone, what was it, the Perth Wellington game? That was exciting. The 2-2 draw, De Vere with the penalty that was saved in stoppage time, as they're battling it out to try to keep their finals chances alive. You got McCarthy, you got Adelaide, you got Brisbane, all those teams that are in there battling. Like it's super exciting. So I think trying to conform to what other countries do isn't necessarily the right answer. And those are some great examples of how each country does it differently. Like if you look at Germany as well in the Bundesliga, they've got the relegation playoff, where in a way that's almost an anti-final, but it is, over two legs for a chance to stay or get promoted into the top division. So, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but let's have a look at the way that the finals are sort of structured at the moment. So at the moment, the top six make the finals. The top two have a first round bye. Third play sixth, fourth play fifth in an elimination final. The winners of those face the top two teams for a spot in the grand final. That's the system that's been in place for the last 8 seasons. Do you like that system, Michael? What are your thoughts?
I think it makes sense that you've got half the league playing finals and half the league not playing finals. So where previously we had had 10 teams in a top 6, it was a little bit strange at times. There'd be a team that maybe doesn't quite deserve to be there, sneak in 6th place. So I think having 6 teams to begin with is a good start. And then we talk about the advantage that in a lot of our final systems we have in Australia, where the higher placed teams have an advantage, and we know that first and second have sort of pretty much an equal advantage, and then third and fourth get to host a single knockout final, whereas fifth and sixth are there to pretty much play away for the whole of finals. And I think that works in the current climate. I think you don't want the final series to extend too long. It costs a lot of money to travel, transport teams around such a large country, and the costs with the game in the last few years has only become more difficult. But at the same time, every game means something, and I think if you were to sort of stretch out the final series or have maybe more teams involved. Maybe the competition as a whole probably would lose a little bit of its meaning. And I think the way it currently is, I can see what you're talking, what we talked about before the podcast started about maybe a top four would be something that could work. Potentially, but I really think that the top six we currently have here, it made sense with 10 teams, but I think it makes a whole lot more sense with the two new expansion clubs that have come in.
I agree as well. I think it was weird when we had 10 teams in the league to have more than 50% of the teams making the finals. You saw a couple of teams get in there who had lost more games than they'd won, still making the finals. But even then, the top two teams would go on to make the grand final anyway. So those teams that just snuck in didn't necessarily make the grand final anyway. So it's sort of weird how, in terms of finals football, it sort of sorts itself out from that respect. So if we talk about expansion very quickly, so let's say that we add a couple more teams. Do you think 50% of teams in the league making the finals, do you think that's the right number? Or let's say the league grows to 14 teams in the near future. Would you like to see it stay at 6?
I think it has to be 50% or less. I think we look at, say, the AFL when the 17th and 18th clubs came in, they didn't expand it out to 10 teams or 12 teams. They kept it at 8, and I think that makes it all the more competitive. So I think you'd keep it at 6 until the competition potentially down the track gets to 16 teams, at which point maybe a top 8 would make a bit more sense. Because again, if you do a top 8 with 14 teams, it's pretty much the same as having a top 6 with 10 teams, where there are teams in there that maybe don't quite deserve to be there, and it does make it all the more competitive come those last few rounds.
So taking a look as well, I've got a few stats for you here in terms of the finals. So the teams that have made the finals most often are Brisbane, Sydney, and the Victory. They've made the finals 11 times out of the 15 years. I'm not including this season. I know the Victory have been eliminated. Sydney have been confirmed. We're uncertain about Victory. So Victory are not in it. Sydney are. We're not certain about Brisbane. So these stats are just including the completed seasons. Brisbane set the record as well. They made the finals 8 consecutive times, and then the most grand finals have been been for Sydney and the Victory. If we have a look at the finals qualifying percentage as well, which might be a little bit of a fairer representation, Adelaide have made it 67% of the time, Brisbane 73%, Central Coast Mariners 47% of the time they've made the finals. Macarthur, we're not sure. Melbourne City have made it 70% of the time. On them, Melbourne City, since they became City, have never missed the finals. The Heart missed the finals 3 out of 4 years, so that's sort of an interesting subplot from there. The Victory have made it 73% of the times. The Newcastle Jets have only made the finals 33%. They've missed the finals 10 times in 15 years. Missed it 7 consecutive years as well, from 2010 to 2017. Perth Glory have made it just over 50% of the time, and Sydney 73%. So you've got Brisbane, Victory, and Sydney who are up the top there. Do any of those numbers sort of surprise you at all?
No, I mean, I think we can all agree that Brisbane, Victory, and Sydney have been the 3 successful teams across all the A-League. If you really average it out, I know the Mariners have had their moments of being, pretty elite, but then they've also had their moments of being really NPL. And you look at City, maybe City are going to challenge, and don't want to pump your tires up too much, mate, but I think maybe the next few years could be really formative for that. Potentially the guard changing somewhat, because it really has been. We had the Royal Salona period, and Sydney are in their period now, and obviously Victory have had a couple of eras of success. They're probably the 3 clubs, other than maybe Victory's current phase that they're going through. They've always really been up there, those clubs.
Just another thing to point out, the alphabet does extend past S as well, the letter S. Wellington have made it 46% of the time, Western Sydney 50%, and Western United 50% as well. I don't know why.
No, this season's not done. 100%.
Right, okay. So you, as a Western United fan, even though you actually mathematically being eliminated, you even cling on to that. That's fine. I'll let you do that. So Western United, 100%. So now
that's it. Now I'm happy.
Sorry. Now that we've covered everyone, so if we have a look at the numbers, there's only 3 teams in the Mariners, the Jets, and Wellington that have made the finals less than 50% of the time. So do you think that's a good thing to sort of have those teams being able? Most of the teams making the finals fairly often. That's got to be good in terms of an even competition structure, right?
I think what that does tell us is that having the finals include roughly half the competition does allow fans of clubs to be optimistic about a season. If the final series only included a handful of teams and the league is say 16, 17, 18 teams, you look at it and go, well, we're going to finish mid-table. That means we're going to miss the finals. So I think it does. If there's a club that's maybe a bit of a mid-table side, they can at least aspire to something rather than just being stuck in mid-table mediocrity. So I think it's a good thing. Obviously, the 3 clubs you pointed out there have had their own success. It's not that they haven't been successful clubs. So I think definitely there's always that room for qualifying for finals because of the way it is structured. It is competitive, but it's obviously split down the middle. So it is a good split.
Yeah, it's interesting. What we're going to do next, though, is we've sort of spoken about some of the leagues around the world. There are some myths, that other countries outside of Australia don't do finals, but we're going to sort of dispel that a little bit, and we're going to have a look at some of the different leagues and see how they do finals football, and sort of discuss there and get our thoughts on each structure there and how that compares to the A-League. So the first one that we're going to take a look at is probably the best comparison to the A-League in terms of a like-to-like structure. That is the MLS the MLS in the USA. That's a tricky one to try to get your teeth around, but we got it out. Yeah, still can't do it. Anyway, moving on. Tricky one to say, but let's talk about it because this is one of the few leagues that also has a full-on playoff tournament. So currently, the MLS is split into 2 conferences, an East and a West. I think it's the top 7 teams from each conference play in the finals. The winner of each conference then faces off in the grand final. The other thing about the MLS, I think they have 32 teams and they're expanding now, but they have over 50% of teams make the finals. I think it's closer to 60%. They've got expansion franchises coming in all the time, so I can't remember the exact number that they're at, but they're going to have over 60% of, close to 60% of teams making the finals. What do you think of that? Yeah, you said that you thought 50% was the number. So the MLS is over there, and they also have 2 conference structures. Do you reckon that's something that we could see, maybe not specifically in the A-League, but in a proposed national second division?
It's interesting you bring that up. I think the MLS is pretty crazy with the amount of teams they have. As you mentioned, every 5 minutes there's a new franchise. So I couldn't tell you how many teams there are. And I guess with the distances that teams travel in the US and also the fact that there are a handful of Canadian teams as well, it does make sense that they have it in a geographic way. I think I don't know if they all play each other once or what the situation is, but obviously they do separate it out, so it does reduce travel, and that's good for the environment and all the rest of it. So there are benefits that come to that. I think just like we know that the A-League is football in an Australianised setting, MLS is definitely football in an Americanised setting. We know that the NFL does it like this. We know the NBA does it like this. Major League Baseball, you'll know better than me. They probably play 300,000 games a season until they jump into a playoffs. We'd need way more teams to make it work in the A-League. I think that goes without saying. Something that looks similar to this. but I think you're right. Something like the proposed second division. We already have something sort of similar to this style with the FFA Cup. Looking at knockout football, I think there's a real appetite for it when it's got heaps of teams involved. It is really exciting. So I think even though it is crazy the amount of teams the MLS has, I think that's only serves to make it all the more competitive because really getting through to the final rounds of that tournament means so much more.
Yeah, and I've just done a quick Google. They currently have 27 teams in the league, but they do have a couple more expansion teams along the way as well. Another big difference for the MLS as well is the MLS Cup is the end of season tournament to crown the MLS Cup champions. So it's the end of season winners are the East and the West Conference champions. So they don't even have a Premier's plate when we compare it to the A-League. You are crowned the Eastern Conference champions and the Western Conference champions. But even then, like, it's all about the finals. Like, the MLS Cup winner is the winner of the grand final. So I still think when you talk about comparisons to the A-League that it is, that's probably the one that's most similar. I totally agree with what you said in terms of it is very Americanized, and maybe it's just the nature of the country, but they don't seem to mind that.
No, they certainly don't seem to change it anytime soon. I know that you scroll through social media and you see that there's a community of people that are advocating for promotion relegation in America. I laugh at that because they're never going to go down that path. They've got their own way of doing sport, and that's just it. Again, I think one key flaw in their system that really compares to the A-League is that you're not rewarded for being the best team throughout the regular season. You're only given a sort of a little trophy for your own conference. So I think definitely, if Melbourne City were in the MLS, which they kind of are, they wouldn't be rewarded for having that sort of season. So I think, definitely that's something that Australia does have over the MLS. It obviously has its advantages by having 27 teams, but definitely that's just the way they like it. I wonder when they'll stop expanding the MLS. It's incredible. I admire them.
I don't think they ever will. It's all about making money over there, and new franchises, and that's another thing that's sort of interesting with the US. Like when you talk about the A-League and franchise models in Western United, MacArthur, or whatever, that is a model that the US have fully embraced. They're all about creating new franchises, and again, they don't have that footballing infrastructure, but yeah, they're just going to keep dishing them out. A lot of the smaller cities have found out that it's a lot easier to support an MLS team than it is one of the other major pro sports. You need a smaller stadium, so that there's a lot of lessons that I think the A-League can learn from the MLS in regards to the way they do things. But in terms of finals football, I am glad that they sort of steer while they're similar. We haven't fully gone down that path of a bunch of teams in there, so I think that's still good to see. Moving on to the next league we're going to take a look at. It is the English Football League playoffs in the UK. Now, these are super exciting games. For me personally, these are like my favourite football games every year. The promotion playoffs to get into the Premier League, to get into the Championship, to get into League One. So the way it works in England, the top teams are automatically promoted. So in the Championship, at least, it's the top two. You then have third, fourth, fifth, and sixth playoff for the last promotion spot. Third plays sixth, fourth plays fifth. It is over 2 legs though, so home and away. Critically as well for England and the playoff structure, at least, there is no away goal rule either. So in a single cup final with the winner gaining promotion. What do you think of this structure? Because this is something where, it's not a grand final in that sense, but there is more on the line, if anything, to win promotion here in this one final game. So it's great. There's plenty of drama. There's plenty of excitement. Both teams are going for it. There's so much on the line. Is that not the same or, pretty similar to a grand final atmosphere?
Oh, it is, and I think you and I both know well the fact that we both support bang average English teams. The absolute value of the championship playoff. Probably one of my fondest memories of being a football fan is the 2012 playoff between West Ham and Blackpool, and Ricardo Vazquez scoring the last-minute winner to get us to the Premier League. It's one of those things that you remember fondly as a fan because of what it represents. Now, in the A-League, it's already the top division, so you can't really have a situation where a knockout tournament determines who gets promoted because they're already in the top division. I think that you could potentially apply it in a different way, where it obviously could be a qualification to, I don't know, the Champions League, or qualification to the grand final, or could well be the final series itself. But obviously, the key difference is that the Championship playoff system, in addition to the League One and the League Two playoff systems being the same, they're special for what the outcome is, rather than the fact that it's the games happen to be at Wembley, or at least the last games at Wembley. So yeah, it's probably not something we would exactly replicate here. But hey, maybe one day with a similar setup with the second division, maybe that could well be the solution. It might be, first versus fourth, second versus third, and it's the one team that wins the big playoff that gets promoted. That could well and truly be the equivalent that we might want one day want to have in Australia.
Yeah, and again, like the circumstances and the scenario is different, but you've got the two-leg semi-finals, and then the big similarity is that showpiece, one day, one game grand final. Obviously in this case it's for promotion rather than just the silverware, but it just sort of goes to show, like, the atmosphere and everything there, like to still have that showpiece event. It's such a big game, and there's so much build up to it. There's so much just emphasis on that one game. So I think, when we compare that to the A-League, we get something similar with the grand final. So I think that is fantastic. Taking a look at the next tournament, it is the UEFA Champions League. So again, this is a little bit different in terms of the build-up structure, where it's, group stages with 4 teams in each group. They play each other. Each side plays each other both home and away. So we're not too interested in that, but it's more the way that the finals work after that, because the next up comes the elimination round. The big difference here is they are drawn randomly, but you play each team over 2 legs with the away goal rule through the quarters and the round of 16, quarters, the semis, up until the final. But again, with the Champions League, we see that big showpiece grand final, and there's, just as much build up, just as much riding on it. Clubs go all out. We've seen Man City, PSG, these clubs have gone all out to try to get a Champions League title for the first time and bring it back to their club. So how does that compare to the A-League grand final? Because again, it's just a big showpiece grand final, right?
Yeah, I mean, it culminates in the season of football that they all play, and I think the away goal rule is something that's unique to the Champions League. The two-legged playoffs, where to avoid it going into extra time, if you've got that advantage by having scored a goal, in the away game for that team, then that gives you that advantage. So I think that's certainly something that has been discussed a lot in terms of, is that something that they want in Europe? I think it definitely brings an element of special, what it actually means a lot to score an away goal, and therefore it gives you that point of difference. With the A-League, again, it comes down to the fact that we're in a completely different football context. Do we have the appetite for that significant schedule that they have in Europe? Obviously they do it their own way, because there's so many different countries that play at such a high level. As at the moment we've got 12 teams. Maybe down the track we'll have more, and maybe down the track we might end up having that appetite for an away leg scenario where there's a lot more on the line across 180 minutes rather than just the 90. But yeah, it is certainly proof that Europeans love knockout football, unlike what maybe their their assumptions might be sometimes, where they say that finals is a bit weird. Well, this is proof that you have it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's not just England, it's not just Europe, it's also Asia that loves finals football as well. If we take a quick look at the Asian Champions League, a very similar structure to the Champions League. The big point of difference, though, is that the final is played over two legs as well. So all the knockout stages are played over two legs the whole way through, including the final. What do you think of that? Do you like that? Again, a lot of this as well with the ACL, we see conferences in terms of we see it split into East and West. A lot of that is out of necessity, considering how giant the continent is, and it would just be ridiculous to having teams flying all over the place. But anyway, having the final over two legs, is that something that you like, that you don't like?
Yeah, I think we look at in the middle of a pandemic, two English teams scheduling a game in Portugal. They're still going to go to that game. If you had a Malaysian side and a Japanese side playing a one-off final in Qatar, probably you're not going to get a huge crowd. It's just they're again very different football contexts, and so when it comes down to the home crowd, you want it to be as equal as possible. Hence the reason why they have a two-legged playoff, and I think it brings certain element to the competition. You point out the fact that they've got the West and East conferences. I think Australia shares those geographic issues when it comes to travel, and obviously, we've got Perth and Adelaide that are on the western side of the country, but we've got 10 clubs on the other side. But maybe there is something in that potentially Australian football could borrow, that geographic, much like the MLS, geographic conferences are often done out of necessity. I know with the youth league we had until that mysteriously disappeared. We had a geographic element to it to save travel costs. So yeah, potentially, there's a bit to be borrowed from that.
And I think it's interesting, having the final over two legs. I think we were talking about before we started that it eliminates some of the randomness. If you win over two legs, over 180 minutes, or sometimes even more if there's extra time, it's sort of, yeah, your victory is more justified. Obviously the example for the A-League would be the Victory Jets grand final, where it's one moment ends up deciding the game. But, if you have, one moment that ends up having a huge impact on the overall result, there are other elements that factored in. But again, coming back to this, when it's over two legs, it sort of provides more of a chance. Like we talk about undeserved winners, so if you win over two legs, I think it is hard to argue that you haven't deserved it by extrapolating it over the full 180 minutes. So I think that is something that's unique as well. And I'm not too sure if the A-League would be able to do that for a grand final. I think there's a lot to be said for that one showpiece final. If you have two legs, it works for the ACL because of the distance, but if you have those two legs, it sort of detracts from it a little bit. It's not just watching one game, it's watching two, then the sponsors, and it sort of dilutes it a little bit. So it kind of makes it in a way a little bit less special. So I think that's probably the only reason that from an A-League point of view, I reckon you'd probably want to stay away from that. But taking a look at one last global tournament, this is the big one. This is the World Cup. Of course, it's held once every 4 years. We have group stages, then it's single elimination all the way through the finals. The big sort of change here is that it's played at neutral venues. So again, it's a little bit tricky to make a comparison to from the World Cup directly to the A-League. But what I want to sort of compare it a little bit more about is with the World Cup, it's a big celebration of football. Like, it's a big festival of football. Everyone's buzzing, everyone's excited. There's so much build up and celebration around it. And I think that's something that you sort of get with the A-League finals as well. What do you think?
Yeah, well, again, the entire world loves the World Cup, so the entire world loves knockout football, and the finals is perfect. And end of story. I think definitely the celebration of football is apt, and I think it's because every game has a huge amount of meaning, rather than it being that there's not many dead rubber games when you get to the World Cup. So I think even in the group stages, so you look at every game, and we'll see it with the Euros coming up. Every match really does have everything on the line, and that's why it's one of the most watched events in world sport. And again, come down to the fact that if we didn't have a final series in the A League and the league campaign and the W League, for what it's worth, the league campaign would just peter out, fade away. The winning teams won the finals, and that's it. And basically, you would just not have enough to play for. So, yeah, it is hard to make that comparison in fairness to the A-League. But, yeah, the World Cup is yet another confirmation that knockout football, although it can be cruel at times, it does create iconic moments.
Yeah, so one of the big things, and again, sort of tying this all back into the A-League as well, is when we look at all these different competitions, as we've seen that the world really does like knockout football. One of the big things that sort of you get a knock on for the A-League is people talk about undeserved winners. Like a team who finishes sixth can go on and win the grand final, and they would be an undeserved winner. But what about all these other teams in all these other tournaments that have progressed through knockout stages? Are they undeserved winners? We saw in the last Euros, Portugal, I think they advanced out of the group stage. They finished third. I think they only drew in all their group games. I don't think they won a single group game, and then they go on to win the tournament, So if anything, they're a slightly undeserved winner. But why does that argument that we seem to have for A-League finals not translate at all to the finals that other European competitions have?
Yeah, again, it comes down to what happens when more than 50% of the competition gets to qualify for the knockout stage. I think it's the World Cup changes that they're looking to make to expand it out further and dilute it even more. I think you like those nice round numbers of 8, 16, and 32, and if you don't have that, then it can lead to those really odd outcomes where a team sneaks in on on an asterisk like Portugal did, and not discrediting how good they were in the knockout part of that competition. They timed their run really well, but it definitely reconfirms that having 50% or less of the competition qualify for the knockout stage is probably the most ideal outcome for competition integrity, because I don't think really touched upon that at all. That's a really important part of the competition. You can't just sort of have this campaign where you play a whole bunch of matches and then all of a sudden it's meaningless because the team you kept on beating are there anyway. So yeah, I think there's definitely, you really need to have that meritocracy in order for the competition to actually mean something.
Yeah. So, mate, what we're going to do though is we're going to take a quick break now. We're going to jump into the Hall of Fame, but after we come back from that, we're going to sum up. We're going to get our thoughts. We're going to compare which models we think the league could incorporate. We're going to come back to it. We're going to sum it all up in a moment, but we're going to jump into the Hall of Fame right about now. Alrighty, so taking a look at the Hall of Fame results from last time. Previous episode, Michael, it was Sean and I who were on. My nomination was Riley Dobson, making an appearance in the FFA Cup. She was the first female footballer to participate in the FFA competition. Sean nominated Mark Milligan's mid-game interview when he was caught on a hot mic. I think he said Rudy Gestede was, the shittest striker?
The worst victory striker in history. Yeah.
Yeah, an unfortunate, not necessarily inaccurate comment, but an unfortunate comment to have on a hot mic. But the results are in. The results from the Hall of Fame for that vote. Riley Dobson is the winner. She received 62% of the vote, whereas Mark Milligan's mid-game interview only received 38%. So Riley Dobson joins the Hall of Fame for a second time. She's up the magical proposal to her final ever W League game. So I think she is, I believe, the first person to be inducted twice into the reserve team Hall of Fame, but inducted for two very separate and equally deserving moments. So that is good to see, mate. But let's talk about this week's version of the Hall of Fame. Who are you going to nominate?
Yeah, well, it's probably not quite exactly the same, but I'd like to nominate Mark Milligan just in general. You know, time of this podcast, he's just announced his retirement from football. You know, he was part of our 2006 World Cup squad, if I'm not mistaken, and he'd been in part of every squad up until now, obviously. So to have that longevity across his career, he's pretty much been around the entire length of the A-League as well. Four different A-League clubs, notably, you know, started off with Sydney. You know, he had some time at the Jets, and then obviously a lot of success at Victory. You know, 2 different stints there, and then obviously finishing up this season with MacArthur. So I think he's been absolutely fantastic with some stints overseas. Really, when it comes down to it, we look back on his career, I think he will be one of the most celebrated players, Australian players, in the A-League's sort of inaugural decade and a bit. I think, you know, a fantastic player. Yeah, as you've pointed out, he's had some interesting interviews over the years. Certainly, there's one that we all know of that we're both thinking of that I cannot repeat on this podcast. So you just have to YouTube for that one. But yeah, definitely a fantastic player in his own right and multiple positions. So yeah, he's my nomination.
A very good nomination, very deserving as well. And I think I saw on Twitter today as well that he is the last member of the Socceroos golden generation still going around. So as you mentioned, he was part of that 06 World Cup. So it really is a bit of an end to an era. Very deserving nomination. I'm going to go head to head, I guess. We'll see who gets through. But my nomination is the Wollongong Phoenix, or the Wellington Phoenix in general. I think that they deserve a ton of credit for what they were able to do during lockdown. Since the last episode, the Knicks have played 2 games back in New Zealand. They played 1 in Wellington, 1 in Auckland. They had over 24,000 people at both of them, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think that they just haven't quite got enough credit or as much appreciation for the amount of effort that went in on their part to relocate from New Zealand to Wollongong. And then last season as well, when we had the shutdown, they relocated. They were in Sydney as well. So I just think the fact that they were able to do that, it would have been very easy for them to, you know, pull out of the league, to not even compete. So to be able to come in, to make the sacrifices they made in terms of the players, the coaching staff and everything, to be able to keep the club running, for them to be competitive as we've seen this year, I think they deserve a ton of credit. I think another thing that they did really, really well was not only did they survive when they were playing away from home, but they also thrived. We saw a number of great initiatives that they brought in. They really sort of made the most of that situation. We saw them capitalize on the Mexican fan base for De Villa, which is unfortunate considering he's now gone to MacArthur. But that was a great initiative where it brought a new element to the game. We saw the fans that they had at all the Wellington games as well. It was something unique. It was something fresh. We also saw they did, what was it, a Wollongong Appreciation Month, where they had a special Wollongong themed jersey as well. So I think to have those kind of community initiatives in a town that isn't even their hometown is fantastic. And for them to then go back to New Zealand and play 2 games in front of mega crowds, I think that the Wollongong Phoenix, I think that's what we're going to call them for this one, deserve a ton of credit for everything they've been able to do to survive, and thrive in the A-League and ensure that the competition can continue with, you know, as much integrity as possible. So, mate, those nominations, they'll go up on our social media. You guys listening have a chance to vote on which one you think is most deserving, the Wollongong Phoenix or, of course, Mark Milligan, as we remember and celebrate his fantastic career. But, mate, we're going to jump back into our discussion point when we're talking all things finals. So one thing that I've just done is accidentally close the run sheet. But one thing that we're going to talk about, mate, is the tournament structure. Because when we look at the A-League finals at the moment, the system where we have in place where the top 2 have the bye, the elimination finals for 3rd to 6th, who then play the top 2 to reach in the grand finals. That's been in place for the last 8 seasons. It's not always been that way, though. Prior to that, we would have the top 2 sides would face off over 2 legs in a semi-final, with the winner going straight into the grand final. We then had third versus sixth and fourth versus fifth in elimination finals. The winner of those face off, and then the winner of that faces the loser of the semi-final that was between the top two teams for a spot in a grand final. If we can, it's a lot to digest, it's a lot to explain, but if we compare that previous...
Yeah, it's hard enough to explain, let alone wrap your head around the old system. I actually completely forgot that it was in place, to be honest, and until you mentioned that. And yeah, I just think it's just overly complex. Adds an extra week to the final series that you don't particularly need. And I think we've spoken a bit about the advantage that the top two teams do get by having the bye and also being able to host their finals match. But I think that advantage to a certain extent is warranted. So yeah, end of the day, probably still achieve that same outcome with a 3-week final series with the way it currently is.
I agree where I like the new final structure a little bit more. I think, if you were a team who had finished third, to play 2 elimination finals and then a semi-final, so 3 finals before you've reached the grand final, versus, the grand final, the other team who's only had to play 2, I think that becomes, a big advantage as well. But looking at the current structure, so you said, I want to get your thoughts on this. Do you think that the advantage that the top 2 have is deserved? And in a way it is, you finish in the top 2, you should be rewarded. But is it too big to have both a bye week and then a home final as well? Is that too much? So I agree that it's warranted. You finish top 2, you deserve some sort of advantage, but is that too big? How could we tweak it to maybe make it a little bit of an even playing field? As we mentioned before, 13 out of 15 years, both the top 2 teams have made the grand final. Does it need to even be any more even? What do you think?
Yeah, 13 out of 15 seasons, the top 2 teams have been able to go and do it. Is that probably because they're the 2 best teams in the competition? At the end of the day, teams know what the lay of the land is. They know they have to perform come finals time. Some teams time their run really well, like Western United last season, where really they were completely out of contention, and all of a sudden we were very, very close from somehow making it through the grand final. And some teams peak too early, like Western United this season.
Did they have a peak this season?
Well, we've definitely had a lull. Let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, you beat Melbourne City for the first time, so that's a pretty good
That was
peak.
probably the peak. But I guess to get back to the main point, I think to a certain extent, the advantage is warranted, but at the same time, those teams are already going into the final series with a heck of a lot of momentum. The bye does give them a huge advantage. And I think, I hate to go back to the AFL again, but a few years ago when they decided to add a bye in between the last round and the first week of finals, it had a measurable impact on the finals itself. Even though all the teams happened to get that bye, it does affect competition integrity. So it's definitely something to think about. If we have expansion in the future, it might be something to help level the playing field a bit more by getting everyone to play, in the first week of finals.
Yeah, and so if we, before we obviously had a look at all the different, not all the different, but a number of different final structures around the world, which elements from those do you think would you like to see incorporated into the final structure? How would you change the A-League finals? Are there any things that you would cherry pick from some of those other competitions? How would you structure it ideally if you were calling the shots?
Yeah, well, I think there's merit to the 2-legged situation. I know I've already just said that we want to try and keep the final series nice and succinct, but that is something that could potentially add an element to the finals campaign, especially if we're looking at a home ground advantage being a bit too severe at some points. I guess my point about what's happened recently with the finals is that we've now got this added element to our season with the added FFA Cup playoffs that the bottom sides are now playing. Now, that actually does, I know it's not technically in the final series, but I think what that does is it actually allows the entire competition, or most of it, to have something to play for. I'd actually like to see everyone have something to play for once the regular season is finished. Potentially, if the A-League does expand beyond 12 teams, it might well be that the entire bottom 8 teams of the competition, let's say it's top 6 and the bottom 8, the entire bottom 8 have to play FFA Cup playoffs in order to qualify for the following season, and that means that there's at least a knockout match that fans have to look forward to. Unlike Victory and Newcastle and Western at the moment, there's not much to look forward to, other than there is going to be this playoff coming up quite soon. So yeah, I think there's a lot about the A-League final series I like, but what I do like is what is coming in now, and it might add a bit more meaning to the end of the season for a lot of these teams.
Yeah, interesting. See, the solution to the finals is to add even more finals. I like it. I like that you mentioned the FFA Cup as well, because that gives us a chance to sort of talk about, cup finals versus grand finals. So, like, some of those competitions that we were talking about earlier are additional to, obviously, the domestic title as well. And so, the difference between premiers and champions, where, the big showpiece in England for the top flight, or for a long time, sorry, as well, has been the FA Cup final. And that was normally the last game of the season, obviously with COVID. That sort of mucked around with the timeline of a bunch of stuff. So it wasn't, I think, the past 2 seasons, but that is normally the final game of the season, where they have the domestic competition, they have the European competitions, and then you've got the FA Cup as the final showpiece sort of game as well. So how does that sort of cup final versus grand final situation evolve? Could you see one day where the FFA Cup final sort of replaces the entire finals series?
I think we come down to logistics when we look at the timing of these tournaments. One of the main reasons why we've got a final series in the first place is it's a really good conclusion to the season. The FFA Cup, for it to run effectively, it needs to start where it currently starts, in sort of that February time slot for the lower rung state league clubs to start their season. You can't get an entire cup competition for the whole country completed between February and May. It just wouldn't work, which is why the final, unfortunately, does have to be later in the year, which is, generally speaking, when the A-League clubs are starting their following campaign. So I think what that does, though, as a bit of a side benefit, is that it allows both tournaments to sit, or both trophies, I should say, to sit in their own right as being of value. And we know that cup tournaments bring something unique to our game, being football. And examples like Tottenham, when they were travelling to was it Marine FC? That ground where obviously not something that a Premier League club would usually travel to. We've seen some amazing FFA Cup trips. Teams like Sydney FC travelled to Darwin. That's the beauty of cup football, and that's something that we really have as a point of difference for our code. But it's also a point of difference for that particular trophy. You're not going to see Marine FC fighting it out for the EPL. You're not going to see, at least currently, a lot of these NPL sides fighting it out for the A-League trophy. So that's what the FFA Cup does bring. And I think they do sit in their own right, not just because of the calendar timing, but because the fact that club football is all inclusive of the football pyramid. And allows those upsets to happen in football, whereas the A-League is all about what happens regular season and then translating over to finals.
Again, talking about the A-League, circling back to that. So what do you think of the premiers versus champions sort of thing, where the grand final, the champions are sort of held in more stead than the premiers? Is that something that you have an issue with at all?
I sort of feel like, and we've been on the pro finals brigade all night, but I think the one thing that definitely I have an issue with is the fact that if you don't do the double, it can sort of demean your achievement and sort of feel that, although yes, you do get the Premier's plate for having that success during the league campaign, if you don't back it up in the finals, it definitely does lose a bit of emphasis there for that club, and it has happened quite a lot in recent years. So yeah, I think in Australia, whoever wins the grand final is always seen as the team. The very few times A-League gets mainstream coverage in our media is when a team wins the A League or the W League title, and they're on the nightly news. It generally doesn't happen when they hand out the Premier's plate. So yeah, I guess that's just that Australian mentality into it. What do you think has the most prestige out of the two?
I think the grand final definitely does. And I think when it comes to tweaking, the finals structure, I think this is actually the thing that personally I would tweak the most. I think the finals structure is more or less, I think it's okay. I think it's good to have finals. I think, as you said, we've been on the pro finals train the whole show. I think that it adds a whole lot to the league, to the excitement, having that showpiece. I'm pro finals, but I think what needs to shift is the mentality on the premiers. I think we need to do more to celebrate the team that finishes on top. And I promise I am not just saying that because as a Melbourne City fan, they just won it for the first time. I promise I'm not.
You just want Victor to do a guard of honour and all that stuff, don't you?
Guard of honor might be a little bit excessive, but I think what needs to be recognized, again, we talked about undeserved winners, sort of throughout the show, and I think that is, a fear where we saw, Sydney beat Perth in Perth when the glory, finished on top by a big gap, and then we saw, the victory beat Newcastle. So I think there is an element of that. And I think the big thing, and as you mentioned, if you don't do the double, that's seen as a disappointment. So I think what needs to be done is that more emphasis and more celebration and more importance needs to be put on the Premier's plate. And again, I think that comes down to other codes. Like when we look at the AFL and the NRL, if you finish on top, it's called the minor premiership, so there's already that demeaning mentality towards finishing on top. It's like, well, great, yeah, congratulations, but that's only minor. So I think in terms of football, I think the finals are great. I think we should keep that, but I do think we need to put more celebration on the Premier's plate because the table at the end of the year, it sorts itself out in a way. If you finish on top after 26, 38 games, whatever it is, you deserve to finish on top. And I think that achievement needs to be celebrated a little bit more. I think the way Melbourne City were able to present the trophy the night that they won it as well, I thought that was really good. I think that's something that I'd like to see happen going forward. At home, obviously, it depends, if you're home or away, but I think that was really good. They had confetti and everything. So I think that was a really good celebration of winning the premiership. So I think that's something that I'd like to see continue and even expand more. I think if we can get away from minor premiership a little bit, not that we fully have that mentality, but I think Australian sporting society as a whole drifts towards that way. I think that'd sort of be the big shift. I don't think the grand final needs to be torn down at all. I just think the Premier's plate needs to be built up more. What do you think?
Well, I think there's probably one thing you can do to try and increase the prestige, I guess, of the Premier's plate, and we have had it in previous seasons. Again, I think I mentioned this before. It's regarding the number of teams that we have that determines how many games you do play during the season. But as we know, it's an uneven fixture. So if you had everyone plays each other twice or three times, then people know in their eyes they can see that the fixture is fair, or as fair as it can be. Whereas, okay, there's not really any harm of it being the case this season, but there might be one season where a team wins by a point, but they happen to play the bottom side an extra time. You can't really celebrate that, can you? So maybe there is a bit of merit to, the Australian mentality because our fixture isn't balanced in the first place.
That's a very good point. I hadn't considered that as well, because then you can obviously apply that to the AFL and the NRL, where they haven't got a balanced fixture in that regards either. So if we look at that then, but even if we had, given the current A-League structure, even if we had you play every team 3 times, so that would be 33 total games, you would still might have, where one team was able to play more games at home versus away, where you might have faced another top team twice at home, which gives you more of an advantage than playing one of the lower teams twice on the road, where you're more likely to pick up a point there. But, mate, that sort of brings us to more or less of an end, but what are you most excited for about heading into this finals campaign in particular?
Yeah, I think not, I wouldn't say randomness, but I think the competitiveness has been there. In previous seasons, unfortunately, we've just had one or two teams really run away with it. Particularly Sydney, and I think this season it really is everyone can beat everyone. And you've got a team like Macarthur and that didn't exist 12 months ago, Central Coast Mariners that were making up the numbers last year. There's a lot. The final series feels really new this season to me, and I think City and Sydney might well be the two favourites heading into finals, but I definitely don't think there's anything predetermined this season, and I think that's what will really bring a lot of meaning and real emphasis to a lot of these knockout games.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. I don't think it's the randomness, as you said. I think a good word is the unpredictability. We've seen some absolutely
That's the word I was looking for.
That's it. We've seen some absolutely cracking matches. We've seen come from behind performances. We've seen ripper goals. We've just seen fantastic footballing spectacles. And I think everyone in the soccer Twitter community and the wider football community have been saying how this has been one of, if not the best season in the A-League all year. All year. Best season in the A-League all year.
It's been the best A-League season this year. Definitely the best one.
It definitely has. Look, that's not an inaccurate statement. It just doesn't quite carry as much weight. But there's a lot of a good argument to make the case that this has been the best A-League season ever. And again, recency bias, and it's very easy to say that, but it has been, if nothing else, genuinely exciting. And I'm really keen to see how it plays out. Another factor as well for Melbourne City, they have sort of, been the leaders of the pack. They've been above everyone else, but, all of a sudden they're losing three important players to Socceroos duty. Whether that's fair or not, we won't dive into that, but we could see that they've come down to the pack as well. So there's a real risk that they might not make the grand final too. So we're going to see a very even final series. We've seen some great matches throughout the course of the season as well. So it's going to be fantastic to see how it all plays out. The finals race is tightening up. We had Brisbane Roar beat Perth Glory tonight as we've recorded. So I believe that means that Perth Glory have been eliminated from finals contention. So they can no longer make the finals. If we have a look at the table, I think Wellington are the last team that can still make it. They can catch Adelaide United, I believe. I'll double check on that, but I think that's right. So it's going to be fantastic to see what plays out. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully, if the finals campaign is even half as good as the regular season has been, we should be in for a mega time, mate. But that does now bring us to an end of the episode, mate. If people want to get more of your stuff, where can they find you?
Oh, look, at Island ERM on Twitter and Instagram. I've just put out an article, went out this morning on the disappointing long weekend it was for my club, Western United. So a bit of reflection on that. So have a read of that one. But otherwise, I'm just going to be ranting about the Euros that are coming up. I'm looking forward to it. What about yourself, mate?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Branson Gibson, Branson with SEN. I'm on the reserve team as well. I've got a bunch of articles up there as well. So that's where you can find me. I just realised as well, it's a little bit harsh having the Western United fan jump on the finals podcast the same week that they officially got eliminated. So our apologies for that, mate. But thanks very much for jumping on and joining us.
Like I say, the season's not done yet. There could be some salary cap breaches coming in the coming days. It's not over. It's not over until it's over.
So if we have a look at the table, so what is it? You need three teams above you. Oh, sorry, four. 4 teams above you to breach the salary cap, and you're in. So
a lot needs to go right, but it could happen.
That's it. Let's not rule it out. Let's not. So the Western United still hoping to keep their 100% finals streak alive. But thank you everyone for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Head to thereserveteam.com.au for all things Australian and New Zealand football. We cover everything Australian and New Zealand football. We've got kit stuff, we've got A-League, we've got W-League, we've got grassroots, we've got referees. Everything that you could want is on thereserveteam.com.au. Check out our socials. We're on pretty much everything. We're on Twitch, Insta, Facebook, Twitter. Make sure to give us a follow, give us a like to stay up to date. But thank you everyone for listening to this week's episode of the Reserve Team Podcast.